Boo. It is Halloween officially today, and I wanted to do something a little bit different to celebrate this spooky season. So for today's Halloween Bonanza Spectacular episode, we are going to be looking at 5 of the scariest beasties in Halloween. This is my cat Aggie. Good to see you, Aggie. You're scary as well. And we are going to be saying which fancy football players they are the most like. Let's get into it. Boo. So, first up, we have the vampire, the Dracula, the scariest of Halloween creepy crawly ghoulies. This is a player who just drains you of your life force. That can be someone who's just so incredibly frustrating while you're waiting for them to finally break out that it just gets so tiring. Or it can be someone who you're just done with. You're just so exhausted of them that you are just willing to move on. I was a little bit uncertain on this one. There were a fair few candidates. I was trying to think of whether or not I could go with someone that's really repeatedly injured. Every time that they are looking to come back, they just go out again, and that is just so exhausting. Or I was trying to think of potentially a quarterback. There's a couple of candidates who you just think they're on the precipice of making it, like Trevor Lawrence was an option, Patrick Mahomes was an option. Every week you think, it's Trevor Lawrence, it's Patrick Mahomes, I've got to throw them into my lineup, and then they just disappoint you over and over and over again. They are slowly sucking out your life force. But I decided to go with the first option, and so the fantasy vampire of 2024 is a player who has gotten injured so many times. He is so close to coming back, but it's never quite happened, and it is just draining. Our fantasy vampire is Christian McCaffrey. Next up, we have our fantasy zombie. Now, this is a player who seems like they should be dead, but just keeps coming back. This was a really interesting one for me. There are a fair amount of candidates this year of players who seem like they should be done, but just keep making it work. Someone like Geno Smith or Baker Mayfield at the quarterback position have been absolutely thriving this year. I mean, even Travis Kelce just keeps haunting us. He keeps being relevant even well into his career. And at the wide receiver position, we keep calling Stephon Diggs dead. We keep thinking that Mike Evans is dead. Cooper Kupp might be dead. He's gotten injured so much. But they just keep coming back. But to me, the zombie had to be a running back. Now, there are loads of great candidates at the running back position. There are so many older running backs who we keep calling dead, but they keep on going. Derrick Henry was an obvious one. He's the RB1 on the season so far. But the thing with Derrick Henry is that we didn't really call him dead when he got to Baltimore. Joe Mixon was another one, but then he did perform down the stretch last season, so I didn't think he was quite dead yet. Josh Jacobs, I'm not 100% convinced on, even though we weren't certain when he went to Green Bay, but he has been doing really well. The guy that I've gone for is someone who is the RB11 on the season, despite people thinking he was just a random flyer last year. His team drafted a running back high up, and we thought, we'll have this guy for the beginning of the season, and then Jonathan Brooks is going to come back, and he's going to ruin this guy's fantasy value. Jonathan Brooks hasn't come back yet, and this guy just keeps going. We thought he was dead, but he keeps on getting back up. The fantasy zombie for 2024 is Chubba Hubbard. If you are enjoying this quite different episode, I would please like to ask you to consider liking and subscribing. If you don't like and subscribe, a ghost's going to haunt you, a werewolf's going to get you, Jason Voorhees is going to come and murder you with a chainsaw. This pumpkin that I've got here, I have quite small hands, so I quite struggle to palm a pumpkin. I think I'd struggle in the NFL, really, mostly because I'm fat, but also because I can't hold the pumpkin. But please consider liking and subscribing. It makes a big difference to the channel. Let's get into it with our next fantasy Halloween monster of the year. Next up, we have our werewolf. Now, this is a creature who only appears once a month and absolutely goes insane. But he's a man for the other 29 days. Then, on the 30th day, a complete monster. So, this had to be a player who was incredibly boom bust. Someone who just absolutely turns into a monster once a month and then disappears the rest of the time. Now, obviously, there's a fair amount of options that we could go with here. We could go with someone like the recently benched Anthony Richardson, who has the occasional game as a QB1, and aside from that, has been absolutely dreadful. We could go with one of our deep threats. We could go with Alec Pierce. We could go with Darius Slayton, who just occasionally turns into an absolute creature and then disappears the rest of the time. The guy that I have gone with is someone that might surprise you a little bit because it seems like he's having a really good season. But our fantasy werewolf had 2 finishes inside the top 10. And aside from that, has been really disappointing when you look at his consistency. He is a very inconsistent player because of how many wide receivers there are on the depth chart. So he's been really struggling to consistently piece it together despite being incredibly talented. But our fantasy werewolf of 2023 is Jaden Reed. Next, we have our ghost. Now, what is the main thing that ghosts do aside from knocking off your stuff in the middle of the night? They haunt you. So, this is a player who only seems to go off when it's on your bench, and you spend the entire season wondering whether or not you can find that week that they are going to be relevant. Now, I feel this is a little bit different from the vampire. The vampire is someone that you are consistently starting or trying to start, and it is just draining you. The ghost is someone that is just haunting you on their bench. They're looking at you going, I scored 22 points this week and you didn't start me. So there are quite a few options for this. Obviously, again, we can look at some of those deep threats. We can look at some of those inconsistent running backs that seem to struggle in different environments. But the guy that I went with is someone who I have mentioned quite a lot on this channel before. He seems to either finish as a top 5 tight end or outside the top 20 tight ends. He is incredibly inconsistent. He does have those absolute boom weeks, but you can just never be sure when to start him. My fantasy ghost of 2024 is Cole Kmet. And our final creepy ghoul spectacular that we have for you today is the mummy. Now, this is kind of the opposite of the zombie. This is someone who looks like they're alive but is actually dead. And you just want to tell them, give it a rest, lay down and die, end the curse, go back to your tomb, back to your sarcophagus, and just rest eternally. Now, again, there are a lot of candidates for this in terms of someone that you think maybe they're dead. No, they're dead. And the point of this is that it's really hard to figure out telling them that they are officially gone. Obviously, partly it can be some of those older players. So Aaron Rodgers was a very, very big candidate for this. But I didn't like the idea of calling Aaron Rodgers Mummy in case maybe he decided to start some sort of Yummy Mummy brand of edibles with it. It felt a little bit of a risk. The player that I have gone with is someone who finishes a top 10 wide receiver in the first week and then hasn't finished inside the top 10 the rest of the time, including multiple finishes outside the top 50. He was then suspended for a couple of games, having already been suspended last year. He was suspended for PEDs this year. It was gambling last year. He's also now recently been arrested for having a gun under the seat that apparently wasn't declared. I really want it to happen for this player because I really loved him coming out, but it just seems like it's not going to. Jameson Williams, you are dead. Fantasy players, he's dead. It's not going to happen. In case you hadn't guessed who it was, my fantasy mummy of 2024 is Jameson Williams. So that is going to do us for today. I hope you have enjoyed this slightly different episode. Wanted to make sure that I celebrated the spooky season in style. If you have any suggestions about where I've gone wrong and you think No, there's no chance they should have been the vampire. This should have been the werewolf. I don't know. Please drop a comment down below. Have a great time tonight, whether you're trick-or-treating, whether you are staying in and watching a spooky film, whether you are going to haunt a young family. Enjoy yourselves. Enjoy yourself getting ready for Thursday Night Football as well. And I will see you next time.